Now, as we are here this morning, I got my PowerPoint going. As we meet here together today to discuss the important matter of religious liberty, a famous courthouse comes to my mind, a remarkable one, built at a time when America was strong and confident in its belief that America was a Christian nation. That New York courthouse is remarkable because it is the only courthouse in the world which has likenesses in the forms of statues of all the lawgivers of mankind. The first and greatest of these lawmakers, and hence the most prominent statue at the courthouse, is Moses. Moses, as you recall, stood with his brother Aaron before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and demanded that Pharaoh let the enslaved people of Israel go. To which Pharaoh replied, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." This is the first example in recorded history of God's people confronting a godless government. And Pharaoh is given to us as a type and a symbol of godless governments in all generations. Pharaoh shows us what happens when a ruler is lifted up by pride, false opinions, and the will to dominate. If the vice is deep-rooted enough, such a ruler will put himself on a par with God himself and claim to be divine. And that is exactly what Pharaoh did. In the film version of the story, the movie The Ten Commandments, Pharaoh says to Moses, "The Hebrew slaves are mine, their lives are mine, and all that they own are mine." To which Moses replies with the best possible answer, "Man shall be ruled by law and not the will of other men." As with rulers, so it is with governments. Governments ruled by the opinions of men and not the law of God at first demand little, perhaps a modest amount of tax. But as their power and arrogance grow, they demand everything which belongs to their citizens. And when their power becomes absolute, they finally claim what belongs to God alone, the lives and souls of men. The annals of godless government, like the annals of the reigns of Pharaoh and Herod, are the annals of misery and slaughter. When a government rejects God, the state becomes a criminal entity, and good men are made into the enemies of the state. The sad history of the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution are testimonies to this fact. I cannot say the same thing will not happen here. It has happened in France, it has happened in Spain, it has happened in Russia, and in all the nations of Eastern Europe. It has happened in China, and in Vietnam, in North Korea, and in every nation which has rejected the sovereignty of God. And I have to make this observation. The nations I just mentioned were civilized nations. Consider for a moment the violence in our own entertainment and mass media, the hatred shown towards humanity in our popular culture, and the already vitriolic level of political debate. Then consider our armed citizenry. The revolution here, if we allowed it, could be the worst in human history. Do not think lightly of a government which compels religious institutions to aid in the murder of unborn children. The unborn are the most defenseless among us, the ones who can be eliminated with the least resistance from the public. Be sure that there will be many, many more if godless politicians and governments continue to grow in size and continue to accumulate power at the expense of individual liberty. The alternative is a government founded on the teaching of Christ. A Christian view of government is not merely one political ideology among many, a series of choices to be penciled in on a ballot. No, instead, it is God's plan for the world. Where it is absent, chaos rushes in. This is the lesson of history, and the signs of chaos are everywhere. We can see it clearly today in the struggle against the left's homosexual political agenda, an agenda that is having devastating consequences on religious freedom and freedom of conscience. Yet too many Americans remain silent among these attacks. I want to give you a few examples, starting with in 2004, where we had the Massachusetts State Supreme Court mandate homosexual marriage in that state. Almost immediately, Boston Catholic Charities, the largest adoption and foster care agency in the state had to close its doors because they would have been forced to put children into homes intentionally devoid of a mother or intentionally devoid of a father that violated their beliefs. So instead, they chose to close doors rather than face costly lawsuits. Does that sound familiar? Right here in Illinois, because of our homosexual civil unions law, we have Catholic Charities of Illinois, and we have Evangelical Child and Family Services closing their doors to help needy children because they would face costly lawsuits. And again, this is where Thomas More Society comes in fighting this in the legal battles in the courts. Thank God for them. But also in Massachusetts, where a parent of a first grade student, let me say that again, first grade student, a gentleman named David Parker, that's the gentleman over there on the left in handcuffs, he was arrested and charged with trespassing at his son's elementary school during a scheduled meeting with the principal of the town director of education. Why? Because his son was read a book in first grade called King and King. It's a picture book, that's a picture from it, where this prince does not want to marry a princess. He instead wants to marry a prince. This is a picture book in first grade. David Parker simply asked the principal, would you allow me to opt my child out of this class when you promote this stuff? He didn't ask for the book to be banned. He only said, let me opt out. They refused. This case went all the way up to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, where Mr. Parker was told, you have two choices, public school or private school. That's the only choices you have. So much for parental rights. Let me give you another example. In New Mexico, where a photographer, a Christian-owned photographer named, Elaine Photography, was approached by a lesbian couple who wanted to have pictures of their commitment ceremony photographed. Elaine Photography said, sorry, you're going to have to find a different venue or a different vendor. You'll have to, because I don't do this, I don't believe in this. Well, they were sued, and they were fined $6,600. How many small businesses do you think could afford that kind of a fine? That went all the way up to the state Supreme Court in New Mexico, and Elaine Photography lost. It's a very similar situation to Mr. Walder and his family. Jim Walder and his beautiful wife, 5 children, own a bed and breakfast in Paxton, Illinois. As a result of the civil unions law being passed here in Illinois, another lesbian couple went to the Paxton bed and breakfast and asked to do their civil union ceremony there. Mr. Walder responded basically by saying, we operate our bed and breakfast for the glory and the honor of the Lord. I'm sorry, this violates our conscience. You'll have to find another venue. Guess what? It's not good enough for the lesbian activist. They're suing him. The Illinois Department of Human Rights and the Illinois Attorney General are suing the Walders right now. Let me introduce you to Kai Feldblum, who is a former Georgetown law professor, a lesbian activist, and an appointee to lead President Obama's EEOC. She says that the battle between gay rights and moral opposition to homosexuality, or you can say it, religious liberty and sexual liberty, is a zero-sum game. One side will win and one side will lose. And she is correct. Religious freedom and special so-called sexual liberty cannot coexist. So we have to deal with the question of which will it be. And my final example to you this morning is Chick-fil-A. As you know, Chick-fil-A came under fire in July because the owners had the nerve to declare his agreement with God on the issue of natural marriage. One man, one woman. Dan Cathy, the Christian CEO of Chick-fil-A, was labeled homophobic, bigoted, and hateful for his beliefs. And homosexual activists targeted him in Chick-fil-A with boycotts. Now, in the first ward of Chicago, where Chick-fil-A was hoping to open their first franchise store, Alderman Joe Moreno publicly declared that he would block the restaurant from opening and doing business in the ward. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel quickly agreed with Alderman Moreno, saying, Chick-fil-A's values are not Chicago values. Government officials in Boston, Philadelphia, and San Francisco were saying the same thing. Chick-fil-A, you're not welcomed in our area. Isn't that telling, brothers and sisters, how far they would take the power that they've been entrusted with? In essence, they are sending a message to Chick-fil-A and all would-be businesses: if you do not bow at the altar of progressive humanism, if you do not toe the line on political correctness, you will be punished. You will be banned from doing business in their jurisdictions. Ironically, when you consider that even the ACLU admitted that this is viewpoint discrimination, the religious bigotry couldn't be clearer. But you didn't hear the dominant media identify it as such, did you? Well, in conclusion, if religious liberty and freedom of conscience is quashed by the heavy hand of government and Christianity is removed from our civilization, the very best we can hope for is a return to the social conditions of the pagan, pre-Christian Roman Empire. But my friends, I don't think we will even achieve that level. You are here today because you recognize where we are headed. Ponder the words of each of the speakers here carefully, but don't ponder too long. We have just 24 days left before the most important election of the century. While the situation we face is difficult, we are not without hope. Let me challenge each and every one of you here today: ramp up your activity. First, let me exhort you to prayer. Commit to praying for our nation and our God, and God's mercy on our nation. Secondly, find a local candidate you like and get behind him or her. Volunteer a couple hours a week, or if you can, a couple hours a day. Choose courage over fear, right over wrong, and choose to do the heavy lifting that needs to be done to get good people elected to office in November. Thank you, and God bless you.
This has been brought to you by the Illinois Family Institute, promoting marriage, family, life, and liberty in the land of Lincoln. For more information, go to illinoisfamily.org.